Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Professor Pastor Paul's Midweek Bible Festival, episode 17. Can you believe it? It's true. We are still, this week, in Matthew. We're going to sort of the middle part of Matthew, and it's all about Jesus teaching about the kingdom of heaven, which we covered last week a little bit of. And then today, this week, we have something that follows right on the heel of Jesus's parables about the kingdom of God. It's a parable, it's a story, not a parable. It's a story that we've all heard since we were wee tots, and it is taken from Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 to 21, and I suspect it will be familiar to many of us, if not all of us. Here's our text. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he said, "Bring them to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled, and they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Let's step through this story one line at a time. We start off with this. Now, when Jesus heard this, Well, what had Jesus heard? What Jesus had heard was that John the Baptist had been killed. Section right before this tells this story. John the Baptist had been jailed for speaking truth to Herod's brother Philip, and Herod had wanted to execute John, but he was afraid of the people who loved John. Now, it was Herod's birthday party, and the daughter of Herodias danced at his party. Salome was her name. That's not in the Bible. That comes from an outside source. He was pleased, so he offered her whatever she desired. So Herod offered Salome anything she desired right there in front of all of his high-powered guests. That's quite a bold move. After conferring with her mother, Salome asked for the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Gruesome, violent. So Jesus hears of what has happened to his friend John and goes out to a deserted place. Why? Because he's grieving, just as we all grieve when a dear friend or family member dies, and solitude is a balm in such a situation. For about a year after Dad died, I couldn't bear to be around people, and I would come home every day and eat lunch by myself on the back porch while all my friends went to the dining hall together. Deserted, empty places have no value in our economy, in the standard human economy, but they have great value in the economy of the kingdom of God. Deserted, empty places have great value in the economy of the kingdom of heaven. They are where we go when we are stripped and vulnerable. They heal us. Empty places heal us by matching and affirming our inner landscape. They are where we might hear God speak. They are places of trial. They are places of utter dependence upon God. So that's where Jesus goes. Well, if Jesus' response to the news about John is to go and find a deserted place, the crowd's response is to go and find Jesus. They're both responding to the same news. Jesus seeks the desert. The crowds seek Jesus. Why do they seek Jesus? To hear an explanation for John's death, or to receive a blessing, perhaps to be consoled by Jesus, perhaps to console Jesus? Probably not, but it's possible. We don't know exactly why they find Jesus, go out to him, but we do know that he sees them and he has compassion for them. Now, this right here is where I would do something different than what Jesus did. I would not get the Just Like Jesus award in such a situation. I would go deeper into the wilderness. I would run and I would flee from the crowd, anything to avoid them and their pesky needs. To be frank, that's what I would do. But Jesus doesn't do this. And if you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus, who, despite his own grief, has compassion on the people and heals their sick. And all day long, too, right up until it was evening. Now, apparently, the people want to be with Jesus more than they want to eat, because no one is going home. And in this deserted place, there is no food to be found. Like the Israelites in the wilderness, the people find themselves in the desert, far from the comforts of home, dependent on God alone. The disciples tell Jesus to send everyone home. Jesus, send them home so that they can re-enter normal human places and be sustained in the normal human way. But Jesus says, no, you give them something to eat. To his disciples, you do it. He puts it back on them. You take action, he said. You give them something to eat. They are flummoxed. We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish, they respond. Sounds like a problem, sure, but let's look closer, keeping in mind what we talked about last week. Keeping in mind what Jesus talked to us about last week in the previous chapter, keeping in mind the kingdom of heaven. The disciples say, we have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. What did they say? We have nothing here but. Aha, there it is. But. They don't have nothing, they have something, and that something makes all the difference in the world. 5 loaves and 2 fish. We have nothing here but. Now, last week we looked at parables Jesus told in the previous chapter about the kingdom of heaven. He told the crowd stories about mustard seeds and yeast. He told the crowds that the smallest of seeds might grow into the largest of trees, where birds can make their home. He told the crowd that a dash of yeast is sufficient for 100 loaves of bread. So when the disciples say, we have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish, we, having ears to hear, might hear, I have nothing but here but a mustard seed, and I have nothing but a tablespoon of yeast. In the economy of the kingdom of heaven, that is sufficient. All of us have something to share. Now, it might be something obvious like money or knowledge or wisdom or skill or a talent. And it might not be individual, it might be communal, it might be us as a church. Maybe we have something to share. And it may be obvious like money or knowledge or wisdom or a skill or some talent. But it may also be as simple as our presence in this community, or as individuals, our presence for each other, our attention, which is the greatest of gifts. It could be our stories, which are healing. So it may be something as simple as presence, attention, and our own stories. We all have something to offer in the kingdom of heaven, and Jesus seems to be saying over and over again in 100 different ways, by parable and by his own actions, that the smaller, less obvious things, the things that are most devalued in the world, are the most highly valued in the kingdom of heaven. They take root, they grow large, they permeate the dough and make it rise and make enough bread for everyone. Speaking of bread for everyone, Jesus tells his disciples, bring what you have to me. Is it a story? Is it your presence? Is it your attention? Bring what you have to me. Jesus tells the crowd to sit, takes what they have, what the disciples have, the loaves and the fish, and he blesses what they have, hands it to them, and all ate and were filled. There is a saying, everyone has heard it, there is no free lunch. I did some research on Wikipedia, the real research, and I found out that this saying, there is no free lunch, originated in the 19th century traditions of saloons providing free food to patrons who had purchased at least one drink. Free lunch, right? But the phrase, there is no free lunch, indicates that in reality, a person or society cannot get something for nothing. Our economy, our standard human economy does not work that way. Even if something appears to be free, there's always a cost to the person or to society as a whole. It may be hidden. It may be a hidden cost. For example, a saloon offering a free lunch will overcharge for its drinks. Externalities also work against the customer. The saloons put plenty of salt in the food so people would drink a lot of beer. But the kingdom of heaven, Jesus shows us in this story, is not a no free lunch economy. It is not an economy of winners or losers. It is not winners and losers. It is not a zero-sum economy. The economy of the kingdom of heaven is not an economy you can keep track of on a spreadsheet. It is not an economy based on scarcity. It is not an economy that awards those who work hard and punishes those who don't. It is not about personal virtue and having a healthy work ethic as much as it is about trust, obedience, faith, and generosity. Think about it. Who are these people in these crowds of Matthew 14? They are ordinary people. Are they good Christians? No, of course not. There was no such thing. Are they virtuous people? I don't know. But my guess is they're not much different than the common lot of sinners and oddballs and regular people Jesus spends a lot of his time with. Are they faithful to Jesus? Some of them may be, whatever that would mean in such a context. Do they all love Jesus? I doubt it. Some of them are probably there against their will. Do they all receive a free lunch? Yes, they do. In the kingdom of heaven, there is no ledger sheet. No one is keeping score. Think about that. No one is keeping score. That's because the economy of the kingdom of heaven is not based on debts and obligations. Where there's a little faith and simple obedience, there's an abundance, even to the point of having more left over after lunch than there was before lunch even started. Examples abound. A tired woman refuses to give up her seat on the bus and sparks the first major direct action campaign of the civil rights movement. A teenager sits alone with a sign in front of the Swedish parliament and sparks a revolution in climate awareness. A teacher in India hears the voice of God on a train, founds a global group of missionaries, and labors for 50 years among the poorest of the poor of Calcutta. An itinerant teacher spends 3 years wandering first century Palestine, talking about the kingdom of heaven to anyone who would listen, is executed by the powers of the day, and the world is still talking about him 2,000 years later. Mustard seeds, yeast, 5 loaves, 2 fishes. Acts of faithfulness have a way of multiplying, friends, is what I'm trying to say. A single good word can propagate through an entire population. One gift can be paid forward 10,000 times. One act of self-giving produces countless more. When you use your voice to speak for those with no voice, the word amplifies exponentially. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control are not commodities to be traded. They are fruits of the Spirit, and fruit begets fruit begets fruit. This is the economy of the kingdom, and it is my prayer that you and I this week and in the weeks to come can find new ways to participate in the kingdom so that it may come on earth as it is in heaven. I love you all. I miss you all. Have a good week. See you next time.